Hello, welcome everybody to today's session. Thanks for joining us for this CrowdControlHQ user masterclass. Today, we're going to be looking at crisis management and how you can use some of the CrowdControlHQ platform features to help you manage a crisis. Why are we looking at social media crisis management? Well, the fact is every organization is actually vulnerable to a crisis, whether you're a business or a public sector organization. And as you know, you can't simply bury your head in the sand until it goes away. So what we're going to look at today is how you can be prepared and understand what to do if you find yourself in a crisis. So my name is Aston. I'm the marketing manager here at CrowdControlHQ. I'm here with my colleague George, who I'm pretty sure most of you will know or have spoken with before.
Thanks for the intro, Dan. Hi, everybody. It is great to see so many familiar people on the webinar today. Thanks very much for joining, and I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you, George. So let's get straight into it. Before we start looking at the CrowdControlHQ platform, just wanted to take 5 minutes to share a little bit around crisis management and social media. So crisis management, sometimes referred to as crisis communications or crisis PR. There's a nice definition here you see on the screen which reads, crisis is any situation that is threatening or could threaten to harm people or property, seriously interrupt business, significantly damage reputation, or negatively impact your bottom line. And what kind of crises can occur? Well, it's things like natural disasters, perhaps like severe weather that prevents the organization operating as usual, man-made disasters. This includes things like terrorism, technology failures. You probably remember a couple of weeks ago now where British Airways actually had an IT systems failure, which grounded many of their flights and actually affected thousands of passengers from traveling as they intended. It could be organizational failures, incompetence on part of the organization, causing itself problems, or even things like rumors, which could be related to the organization itself, or even the senior management team working at the organization. And when we look at the organizations on the line today using CrowdControlHQ, we tend to use the term enterprise social media. And that really represents the fact that you tend to have multiple social media accounts, multiple teams and departments using social media, also different objectives for using social media in the first instance. So it's a complex social media environment. And all of these things can be impacted in the event of a crisis, like we mentioned on the previous slide. So what do organizations tend to think about social media and crisis management? Well, I've put here on the slide a couple of interesting stats from some recent research that shows before a crisis, there's actually 65% of organizations feel that social media makes the crisis more difficult to manage. But what's interesting, after a crisis, it's 55% believe social media actually makes it easier to recover from a crisis. So there's a big difference there in opinion. Comparing before a crisis and after a crisis, showing actually how social media does give you an advantage when communicating with the public or with your customers. And here I wanted to share a couple of recent examples that you probably remember. So Volkswagen with their emissions scandal, this is a good example of how not to respond to a crisis on social media. So actually when the emissions scandal first broke, it took Volkswagen's global Twitter account 4 days to stop posting promotional content. Perhaps slightly better, the Volkswagen USA Twitter account, they did actually stop posting when the news first broke, but then there was no response or no messages acknowledging the situation, it was just silence. So this is poor management really, and it made the entire situation sort of snowball into something much larger than it originally perhaps was or could have been on social media. But an interesting, Alton Towers, on the other hand, is a good example of how you can manage a social media crisis. So you probably remember not too long ago, there was an incident where an accident with a roller coaster which closed the park. But Alton Towers actually were very quick to post statements about the accident on their Facebook and Twitter accounts. And they replied to messages they received on social instead of simply broadcasting out. And they were also very quick to change their website homepage and acknowledge the incident. And they actually had a company spokesperson ready very quickly to communicate with the media and make announcements related to the incident. So by being prepared, acting quickly and sensibly in this way, Alton Towers actually garnered a lot of sympathy around the accident rather than criticism by ensuring that all of its stakeholders were kept well informed. And here you see an interesting stat from some recent research that suggests only 54% of companies today have a crisis plan in place. So there's a lot of organizations out there which are simply not prepared. But why don't they have a plan? Well, they say things like it's rarely going to be needed, or it's too difficult to set up. They think it's too expensive, or it's just not high enough priority for them. Or they don't know enough about what exists out there today that could help them plan for a crisis. Or they just think it takes too much time to start planning for a crisis. So if you don't have a plan today, what can you start to do to ensure your organization is prepared for a potential crisis, and using social media to help? One approach which I particularly like is this 10 Steps to Crisis Communications by Jonathan Bernstein, which you can see here on the screen. And points 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all really around being prepared for a crisis. So you can anticipate crises that might come up by brainstorming around what could potentially occur. You need to put together a small team of individuals who are assigned to respond in the event of a crisis. You need to identify who will be your authorized spokesperson, ensure they have the necessary training that they need to be able to respond in the crisis. Number 5 is around being able to effectively listen on social media and monitor for the first signs of a potential crisis. So you can actually get one step ahead, and in some cases prevent it becoming a crisis at all. And George will touch on this a little bit later in the presentation. Point 6 and 7, this is important because it relates to knowing who you need to communicate with in the event of a crisis, and what your holding statements will be in the first instance that you can publish before you've had time to put together a more detailed response about the particular situation. Points 8, 9, 10, this is really around what you do post-crisis. So this is where you need to gather all of the information you have available to be able to form an accurate response or accurate responses to messages you've received on social, and then understand what you did right, what you did wrong, and perhaps what you could do better next time